If you've ever been blindsided by cheating, the betrayal didn't start when you found out. It started months earlier, when small warning signs were ignored, justified, or explained away. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Attraction makes men emotionally blind. It softens judgment. It convinces you to wait, to hope, to give the benefit of the doubt long after patterns are already forming. And women who eventually cheat don't suddenly change. They test boundaries quietly, one step at a time. This video isn't about paranoia or bitterness. I'm going to walk you through 9 traits that reveal risk early, before attachment clouds your thinking. Traits most men notice only in hindsight, when the cost is already paid and clarity arrives far too late to matter. You don't miss early warning signs because you're naive. You miss them because attraction changes how your brain works. When you're drawn to a woman, your mind starts filtering information. You focus on how she makes you feel, not on what she's showing you. That's attraction bias. Your judgment doesn't disappear, it just gets quieter. Red flags don't look red anymore. They look like misunderstandings, bad timing, or stress. Then there's hope bias. The belief that this connection is different. That if you're patient enough, supportive enough, calm enough, things will naturally improve. Maybe she just needs time. Maybe I'm overthinking it. That voice doesn't come from logic. It comes from emotional investment trying to protect itself. Women who later cheat rarely reveal themselves all at once. They test boundaries in small, almost unnoticeable ways. A delayed response here, a vague explanation there. Nothing explosive, nothing obvious. Just enough ambiguity for you to explain it away. And that's the trap. Not deception, but gradual normalization. By the time the truth becomes undeniable, you're already attached, already invested, already compromised. What you ignore early, you don't escape later. You pay for it with time, trust, and self-respect. Number 1. Control and dominance addiction. There's a critical difference between attraction and the need to dominate, and most men confuse the two early on. Attraction is mutual, it flows back and forth. Dominance addiction is one-sided. It's about winning, not connecting. A woman driven by control doesn't just want you to desire her. She wants to feel above you, emotionally, psychologically, sometimes sexually. The relationship becomes a subtle power contest, and she needs to know she's the one setting the tone. Cheating, in this case, isn't about dissatisfaction. It's about validation of authority. It's the unspoken message, I still control the game. I still decide the rules. You'll see the signs early if you're paying attention. She reacts strongly when you don't respond the way she expects. She gets irritated when you don't chase, when you don't explain yourself, when you don't adjust your behavior to stabilize her mood. Small moments where she tests whether she can pull you back into alignment. If you pass those tests by overcorrecting, by proving, reassuring, or appeasing, you reinforce the dynamic. She learns that your emotional center can be moved. That's power. And here's the truth most men miss. When a woman cheats from this place, it's not because you lacked something. It's because she needed to prove something to herself. Cheating becomes a dominant signal, not an escape. When control matters more than connection, loyalty is always conditional. Number 2, the victim mindset paired with moral justification. This trait is especially dangerous because it hides behind pain, and pain triggers male empathy. A woman operating from a victim mindset rarely sees herself as an active participant in her choices. In her internal story, things happen to her. She's misunderstood, unappreciated, emotionally neglected. And once that narrative takes hold, accountability quietly disappears. Listen closely to the language. I wouldn't have done this if you pushed me away. I had no choice. Those aren't explanations. They're moral escape hatches. By framing herself as the injured party, she gives herself permission to cross lines without fully owning the consequences. Cheating becomes a reaction, not a decision. A response to suffering, not a betrayal of trust. In her mind, the blame is already assigned, and it isn't hers. This is where men get trapped, because you're wired to fix problems, to soothe distress, to restore harmony. When she presents herself as wounded, you instinctively step into repair mode. You listen longer. You apologize more. Sometimes you even accept responsibility for things you didn't actually do. That's the shift. The moment you start apologizing to stabilize her emotions, the power dynamic changes. She learns that guilt works, that vulnerability, real or performed, gives her leverage. Cheating doesn't begin with desire here. It begins with resentment, with the quiet belief that she's owed something the relationship failed to provide. And once betrayal feels justified, loyalty becomes optional. Number 3, the normalization of infidelity. Cheating rarely feels shocking to someone who has already made peace with it. Sometimes that normalization comes from her own past. She's cheated before, maybe once, maybe more, and instead of confronting what it says about her values, she reframed it. It was complicated. I was young. It didn't mean anything. The behavior gets minimized, and with it, the moral weight disappears. Other times, the influence is external. Her friends cheat. Her family excuses it. Affairs are treated like drama, not betrayal. When infidelity is repeatedly observed and forgiven in her environment, it stops feeling taboo. It becomes an option on the table, one she knows won't necessarily cost her everything. This is where men often misplace trust. They listen to promises instead of watching patterns. They focus on what she says she believes, not what she's already proven she can live with. But values aren't revealed in ideal circumstances. They're revealed when temptation shows up and boundaries are tested. A woman who has normalized cheating doesn't see it as a line you never cross. She sees it as a line you cross under the right conditions. Stress, opportunity, resentment, validation. Once those variables align, the decision feels less like a betrayal and more like a justification. That's why "it only happened once" is rarely a comfort. Once isn't an accident. It's a precedent. It shows what she's capable of rationalizing when the situation suits her. Promises are easy. Values are predictive. And when infidelity no longer feels morally heavy, loyalty becomes fragile. Number 4, the communication withdrawal pattern. This isn't about silence, and that's why most men miss it. When communication breaks down before cheating, it rarely stops outright. Instead, it changes texture. Responses become shorter, less present, less emotionally engaged. She still talks, but she's no longer connecting. You'll feel it before you can explain it. Conversations that once flowed now feel transactional. You share something meaningful, and it lands flat. You ask a question, and the answer gives you nothing to build on. There's no curiosity coming back your way. No emotional reciprocity. This withdrawal often gets misinterpreted as stress, busyness, or mood swings. And sometimes that's true. But the pattern matters more than the excuse. When emotional availability starts fading without repair, it signals a shift in investment. Emotional detachment almost always precedes physical cheating. Before someone shares intimacy elsewhere, they first reclaim emotional distance at home. It reduces guilt. It creates psychological space. It makes crossing the next line feel easier. Here's what to watch instead of her words. Does she still ask about your inner world? Does she follow up on things you care about? Does she show interest when there's nothing to gain? If communication becomes selective, warm when it suits her, cold when it doesn't, that inconsistency isn't accidental. It's boundary erosion in progress. When emotional presence disappears, it creates a vacuum, and vacuums don't stay empty for long. Number 5, a split social reality. This trait doesn't announce itself loudly. It hides in plain sight, behind schedules, social circles, and independence. A woman prone to cheating often lives in two separate worlds. One world includes you, the other doesn't. And the problem isn't that she has a life outside the relationship, it's that those lives never meaningfully intersect. In one version of her life, she's your partner, grounded, attached, accountable. In the other, she's socially single, flirtatious, unobserved, free from consequence. You'll notice it in the details. You rarely meet the people she spends the most time with. You're absent from stories about nights out. Photos appear without context. Plans are vague. When you ask questions, the answers feel incomplete, not defensive, just conveniently hollow. This separation creates psychological permission. When you're not part of her social reality, it's easier for her to behave as if you don't exist in it. Boundaries blur. Identity shifts. The rules change depending on which world she's in. Party self and relationship self start operating under different moral standards. What would feel wrong in one environment feels justified or invisible in the other. This isn't about trust issues. It's about structural risk. A relationship that doesn't exist across her real social life is fragile by design. So ask yourself one uncomfortable question. Do you actually exist in her real life, or only in the version that's convenient? When a relationship lives in isolation, a double life doesn't feel like betrayal. It feels like flexibility. Number 6. Secrecy taken too far. Privacy that turns strategic. Privacy is normal. Secrecy with intent is not. Healthy privacy protects individuality. Strategic secrecy protects behavior. The difference isn't philosophical, it's behavioral. When secrecy becomes excessive, inconsistent, or defensive, it's no longer about boundaries. It's about control over information. You'll notice the shift when transparency disappears without explanation. Phones suddenly locked down. Screens turned away. Notifications muted. Schedules that used to be clear become vague. Plans change without context. Not once, but repeatedly. Not dramatically, but predictably. Here's the key distinction. Healthy privacy doesn't feel confusing. Strategic secrecy does. When someone is hiding something, they don't just hide the thing, they manage access. What you see, what you know, what you're allowed to ask without being made to feel intrusive. Information becomes rationed, details become optional, and when you press for clarity, you're reframed as controlling or insecure. Cheating rarely relies on impulse alone. It requires logistics, time windows, plausible explanations, digital cover, emotional compartmentalization. All of that demands a system, and systems leave patterns. Watch for secrecy that escalates instead of resolves. Watch for explanations that shift instead of clarify. Watch for defensiveness that appears only when certain topics come up. This isn't about invading privacy. It's about recognizing when privacy is being used as a shield. When someone needs a security protocol to maintain peace in a relationship, the issue isn't trust. It's that something requires protection. And whatever needs that much protection usually isn't harmless. Number 7. A refined deception skill set. This is the most dangerous trait on this list, not because it guarantees cheating, but because it destroys your ability to trust your own perception. Deception at this level isn't clumsy. It's calm, plausible, internally consistent. She doesn't just lie, she constructs narratives, stories with just enough detail to sound real, just enough emotion to feel sincere, and just enough ambiguity to make you doubt yourself. When suspicion arises, watch what happens next. She doesn't answer the question. You end up answering hers. She doesn't defend her behavior. You defend your reaction to it. This is gaslighting in real life. Not dramatic, not obvious, subtle psychological reversal. The focus shifts from what she did to how you're feeling about it. Suddenly, the conversation isn't about facts. It's about your tone, your trust issues, your past, your insecurity. And slowly, something dangerous happens. You stop listening to your instincts. You second-guess your memory. You rehearse conversations in your head, wondering if you misread things. You start asking permission to feel uncomfortable. That's the cost. A woman with a strong deception skill set doesn't need to hide perfectly. She just needs to confuse you long enough for doubt to replace clarity. Once that happens, she has time, space, freedom. This is why this trait often sits at the center of repeated betrayal. Because even when evidence surfaces, the story reshapes itself. Apologies sound convincing. Explanations feel airtight, and consequences get delayed. Cheating survives not on lies alone, but on your loss of confidence in what you already know. When your reality becomes negotiable, loyalty is no longer enforceable. Number 8. Commitment avoidance. This trait isn't loud. In fact, it often hides behind charm, flexibility, and going with the flow. A woman who avoids commitment doesn't necessarily reject relationships. She rejects closure. She resists anything that limits her options. Labels stay vague, boundaries stay negotiable, futures stay hypothetical. There's always room to maneuver. She may talk about long-term possibilities. She may even sound emotionally invested. But watch her actions, not her language. Does she actually build towards something? Or does she keep every door slightly open? Commitment isn't about intensity. It's about exclusivity under pressure. It's about choosing, even when other opportunities exist. A woman who avoids commitment enjoys the benefits of connection without accepting the constraints that come with it. Cheating often grows here not from desire, but from convenience. When commitment was never fully anchored, betrayal doesn't feel like a violation. It feels like a gray area, a technicality, something that doesn't count because nothing was ever fully defined. This is where men confuse patience with progress. They wait. They assume clarity will arrive naturally. They believe consistency will eventually replace ambiguity. But avoidance doesn't resolve itself with time. It entrenches. If someone refuses to close doors, it's not because they're cautious. It's because they want access to reassurance, to freedom, to alternatives. Cheating becomes possible not because temptation appears, but because commitment never solidified. When loyalty depends on circumstance instead of choice, it won't survive opportunity. Number 9, validation dependency. This is the trait that ties all the others together. A woman dependent on external validation doesn't feel grounded on her own. Her sense of worth fluctuates based on attention. Who wants her? Who notices her? Who desires her? Without that feedback loop, insecurity creeps in fast. You'll often see this expressed as jealousy. Not because she's afraid of losing you, but because she assumes you operate the way she does. Projection turns suspicion outward. If attention equals value in her mind, then withholding it feels threatening, and seeking it elsewhere feels justified. Cheating, in this case, isn't about replacing you. It's about regulating emotion. Each new source of attention delivers a quick hit of relief, a rush, a reminder that she's still desired, still powerful, still relevant. But dopamine fades, and when it does, the cycle repeats. This is why reassurance never seems to last, why validation requests escalate, why boundaries get tested again and again. The relationship becomes a supply source, not a partnership, and when one source feels insufficient, another is quietly added. What makes this trait especially important is that it explains the why behind the rest. Control feeds validation. Secrecy protects it. Deception preserves access. Commitment avoidance keeps options open. Cheating here isn't a rebellion. It's a dependency loop. And no matter how supportive or attentive you become, you can't stabilize someone who doesn't know how to generate self-worth internally. When validation becomes a need instead of a bonus, loyalty becomes negotiable. If you recognized some of these traits, don't rush to judgment about her or about yourself. This isn't a checklist meant to turn you suspicious or bitter. It's a framework designed to protect you from the most dangerous mistake men make in relationships: confusing emotional intensity with clarity. These 9 traits aren't about labeling women as good or bad. They're about patterns, and patterns exist whether we acknowledge them or not. Cheating doesn't feel devastating because it happens. It feels devastating because deep down you realize you ignored what was already there. The real loss isn't just trust, it's confidence in your own perception. Men don't lose power in relationships because they care too much. They lose power because they invest before they observe. They commit emotionally before behavior reveals itself. And once attachment takes root, objectivity becomes expensive. Early awareness changes that. When you can recognize these traits early, you don't need confrontation. You don't need surveillance. You don't need to accuse, interrogate, or fix anything. You slow down. You watch. You let consistency or inconsistency do the talking. That's not fear. That's discipline. This isn't about controlling women. It's about controlling your decisions. A grounded man doesn't chase clarity after betrayal. He builds it before commitment. He doesn't gamble his self-respect on potential. He invests based on patterns, not promises. And when something feels off, he doesn't explain it away just to preserve a fantasy. You don't need to harden your heart. You don't need to become cynical or closed off. You just need to stay awake long enough to see what's actually in front of you. If this breakdown helped you see relationships more clearly, subscribe to this channel. This is where we decode female psychology without sugarcoating, so you can move through relationships with calm, confidence, and self-command. Like the video if clarity matters more to you than comfort. Share it with someone who needs perspective before emotions take over. And comment below if you've seen these traits play out in real life. Awareness isn't paranoia. It's self-respect.